Next I'd like to introduce Ravi Pina. Ravi will be presenting Wi-Fi Manager, herding the access points without losing your sanity. Ravi is a network engineer at Scale AI and traveled across the bay from Oakland to join us today. This is Ravi's first time presenting at NANOG, which we're grateful to have you. And it is a pleasure to have you speaking with us today. Please welcome Ravi to the stage.
I grabbed one. Then how do I just... Check? Microphone check. Everyone hear me all right? Sweet. It's awesome to see so many people here this late on a Wednesday. This has been a great conference. Definitely wanted to thank the program committee for selecting my presentation, especially Kate, who helped massage the slide deck to make it presentable. So now it's all on me to make sure that it's entertaining enough for all of you. I am here to talk about a tool that was more or less a kind of like a passion pet project of mine that I dubbed Wi-Fi Manager, because that was the only name that wasn't taken by any of the other AP companies and wireless companies. And it is an intent-driven tool that's all CLI-based. I'm going to talk about the motivation for creating the tool at all. There was definitely that like aha frustration moment of mine. Go over, really my approach, how I wanted to tackle this problem, or at least the problem that I perceived existed. What are the benefits to us as operators, and then overall architecture of how it works. The demo is not really a live demo because I didn't want to tempt fate, especially this first time on stage here. And then a roadmap to see how I want to advance the project. It is open source, so definitely want to hear some feedback as it's hopefully adopted by teams. So the overall motivation kind of stemmed maybe about 16 years ago. I was working at Mozilla, and we had a tremendous number of phones that we were using to test the Firefox client on. And we had APs all over the place and just crazy like skunkworks projects and things like that. And it became very clear that managing multiple APs and in like high densities and constantly trying to change things was somewhat challenging as an operator. The vendors at the time and then all the usual suspects that are still around now really didn't have the most graceful way of using their CLI to manage a lot of aspects of wireless infrastructure. There are a lot of like objects that are kind of like dependent on one another, and there's very strict order in which you have to create things in order things to actually get configured correctly. As my career kept on going on, different jobs, kept on finding myself working with wireless, Nest Labs. We had tons of APs, trying to interop with devices. Then I moved on to Google, where it blew my mind as far as the sheer magnitude of the scale of number of APs to deal with. It was the first experience of being truly multi-vendor and dealing with the negotiations with that. And then on and on and on with different types of environments. But all the time, the constant thread was there's always this like frustration of mine of how do we do this better, because it seemed like that no vendor was really kind of cracking that nut. One of the things that I in particular was bit by, and I think we all were bit by, is basically like fat fingering something. As soon as you push a config with a lot of the wireless infrastructure, a lot of the controllers, and even in the GUIs, you set it and it goes live right away. So if you inadvertently delete something, goes live right away, and maybe the SSID disappears, and you're scrambling to figure out what exactly happens. And if you don't have documentation, how do you restore that? Or maybe there's a PSK in there that was only on the controller, and now it's completely gone. So one of the things I wanted to accomplish was like, how do we overcome this problem? And because I'm approaching it from a CLI, it's like low-hanging fruit of trying to have config diffs in order to push it out. The issue also was at my tenure at Google, we were the team, and especially Mike Albano, he was really trying to get GNMI and OpenConfig to be supported by the vendors that we were using there. However many years later, it was like maybe 6, 8, 10 years later, still quite not there, if at all. It's very frustrating. I know like in the route switch world, even with some firewalls, that's a little bit more widely adopted. But the reality is that wireless and APs and that infrastructure is kind of like a second-class citizen when it comes to like a lot of this cooler technology. Some of the suggested goals of mine were basically to solve my annoyances today. Now, I will say that there's a little bit of irony that I'm not really managing wireless networks anymore. And so the project is really, truly a passion project. I mean, I am involved with kind of helping the team at scale with the wireless infrastructure there. But the reality is like I'm not really in the trenches like I was at previous places, dealing with, again, hundreds, thousands of APs. But my approach, though, is I want to make sure that there were no regrets when I created this tool. I didn't really want to go down this path and get overly committed or entrenched in some mindset. And I wanted to make sure that there was enough flexibility in with the tool so that other people would find it compelling to use, and it wasn't just like a thing for me. And I wanted to really keep it simple. Try to keep scope creep out of the way. I have to say, I'm not a developer. I'm a network engineer. I've always been a network engineer. I know how to use my ham hands on the keyboard, but I learned Go when my time at Google. And so I'm like, okay, well, I should probably use what I learned to actually do something fun with it. And so this is how we got to the Wi-Fi manager. Some of the objective goals of mine in order to make this, really, in my perception, to be a successful project is that it needs to be open source. There are a lot of tools that I see in Nanogs a lot of times that people present, and they're really, really awesome. And then I find out that they're closed source, and there's something is maybe not fully available or fully released to the public. I'm like, darn it, that's kind of a bummer. So that was kind of first and foremost. I also want to make sure that this was vendor agnostic. There aren't as many wireless vendors right now through consolidation, but the point is that if you're in a multi-vendor environment, you want to make sure that the tool can address any vendor. And I also want to make it extensible so that as new vendors come up, the architecture and the framework of the tool will accommodate that. Another key was managing only the attributes or the configurable variables within the system that we need to. There's tremendous amount of knobs and switches within the wireless platforms, from radio configs to authentication, PSKs, sites, groups, things like that. But the tool doesn't need to manage everything, and so I really want to kind of take this approach of bite-sized. So to that end, you explicitly define the variables or the key values that you want to actually manage throughout the tool. And I wanted this to be a rapid deployment tool. So not a lot of click ops involved because a lot of the wireless, as I mentioned, is all through GUIs and things like that. Some of the stretch goals that I wanted, which I was thankful to be able to accomplish, revision control. It's not the greatest because, again, this is you're pushing through through an API for the two vendors that I'm supporting right now. API caching, so we're not hammering the API and then hitting thresholds. So basically, do a snapshot of what's going on when you do a runtime, or you can force a refresh of the cache. Basically, ingest all the information from the API, and then you can work with it kind of offline, more or less. And then when you need to, you can do a quick refresh, either complete or tactical of whatever devices that you're going to be manipulating. I also wanted to integrate this with other tools in the ecosystems that I've been working with. NetBox is the source of truth or source of intent, depending on how you want to call it. CheckMK is the monitoring system that I've been using most recently. And I wanted to keep it simple, try to preserve a lot of the existing data models and structures that existed. So I was leaning on using JSON instead of YAML and things like that. Hopefully, it doesn't really cause that much of an issue when it comes to actually implementation. So the benefits to the operators was mainly quick deployment, and from my experience when I was tooling around with this at the early stages of the product. There's consistency between the vendors because the syntax that I'm using is basically vendor-agnostic as much as it can be, although as I'll mention a little bit later, like I do lean in on what Mist Systems, which was acquired by Juniper, their kind of structure and language and things like that, because it just kind of made sense and it was easy to map other vendors into the way that they were approaching it. No vendor lock-in by using this tool, free and open source. You can create interfaces to other vendors pretty easy. And what I enjoyed by this was working with security teams and other things like that. Like there are better audit trails, which the providers are now having more integration of now, so it's kind of a little bit redundant, but it's nice to have an audit trail of this tool in particular so you can actually see like what you may have pushed or the changes that you may have done. As I mentioned, that the architecture is basically taking a JSON, large JSON file or multiple JSON files. That is the root config, but you can also do the spot and dot I use PDFs, and spot and dots more or less, if you're familiar with doing access point placement, is you get the floor plan from the contractor or the architect, and you literally just place markers of various methods. Like everyone does it slightly differently. You'll see later on my particular implementation. Wanted to have, like I said, to tie into a truth and intent system. Gets a little tricky that I found because the providers through their API, like that ostensibly is the truth system, but everyone also will have potentially their own internal truth systems, like like a NetBox or Autobot or things like that. So trying to figure out a way to have everything kind of coexist and not reproduce too much of the work. There's the core of the application, which is basically, as I mentioned, we're doing the mapping of what the config in Wi-Fi manager will map to the particular key within the provider. So there is kind of like a flattening of the values. And then the output is just traditional push over the vendor's API. So I'm using all their native packages that they've published, and everything is all no special sauce with that at all. So I'm going to go over the provisioning workflow, but this is basically a high level of what I'm going to show you in the next several slides. Basically start off with site definitions, the spots and dots as I mentioned, how you can have generic configurable options, and then vendors have vendor-specific options, so I account for that. So again, with Mist and Meraki, they're within the config blob, you can explicitly say okay, here's Meraki : and then all the vendor-specific attributes can be configured there. As I mentioned again, multi-vendor, because I feel this is very important, so I want to drive that home. This is hopefully, yep, it looks not too bad. This is how the config will look, where you're declaring the APIs. The Meraki and Mist are actually just the internal labels of how we want to refer to those APIs, so that those labels can be anything. And then we're defining just basically how we gain access and how do we identify the organizations of those vendors. And as mentioned, that there are vendor-specific options. So we include those in the configuration blocks of the sites and of the actual devices. So these are illustrating some of the very specific things that you might want to configure. So as part of the demo, so this is how you would invoke the tool to basically initialize a site. And the idea behind this is to really bootstrap you as the operator to generate the initial configuration template. And it has just enough of the structure, so you don't have to like start from scratch completely, or read too many of the documentation to try to like decode what needs to exist. And then once that happens, it gives you a lot of feedback as far as like what it's done and where it's creating all the files. The config definition, as I mentioned, here's what a my site looks like. So at home, I'm actually using this to manage, well, a couple of the test APs at home. Going on further to show, again, how the config temp or the structure or the outline of the configuration will look. And to bootstrap, there's a chicken and egg problem that I've noticed when it comes to actual AP deployment. Sometimes you'll have just a raw list of APs. As I mentioned, I like to use floor plans for spots and dots. And so I really wanted to lean heavily into this. And this is something that I know that at previous places I worked at, and I know that this kind of method has been carried on to the various people on the team who've gone elsewhere, to where we use these floor plans, because it accomplishes two things. One, the floor plan will get imported into the GUI, so you can actually then do the heat mapping and station location and identification. You give floor plan over to your voltage contractor, because they're going to be looking at the map to figure out which AP goes where. But I wanted to also kind of capture the fact that we're creating this plan for these various resources and encode as much information into the plans as possible. So by using a notation, which is at the very bottom there, so at, and then the name of the AP, and then use / to encode basically the band, the channel power, and the channel width. And so the example there is showing that the AP01 and 5 gig is using channel 36. The transmit power is going to be 18 dB, and then the width will be 80 megahertz. And then the 2.4 gig, and I shortened it instead of just doing 2.4, it's just 2, will be channel 6, 12 TX, and 20 is the width. So that's what the floor plan actually looks like. That is my actual house. So you can see there that there are 2 APs on that particular floor of the house, and the AP is named 1-1 and then 1-2, and that's how I have the configurations for the different radios. When there isn't any values for the transmit power of the channel, we just collapse it with colons, and that implies that it's going to be automatic channel selection and transmit power. And again, another floor in my house, same idea. And then the attic. And then once all that's created in the PDF through the tool, thankfully there was a PDF library that was able to do this without it being too annoying. But basically it'll pull in all those APs that I had configured. You'll see here where it's actually saying that there are APs that are in the PDF that were not found in the site configuration. So one of the things that I really wanted to ensure was not shooting myself in the foot. I've done it enough times, and it can be frustrating. And as I mentioned with APs and wireless infrastructure, sometimes when you set it, it's an instant set. So I've installed a lot of protections into the application. So there's kind of like a positive confirmation or positive declaration of the devices that you're going to manage, in addition to the attributes of those devices. So in the configuration, if I'm not defining these 4 APs, it's going to give you an error saying, well, cool, you're trying to import these APs, it'll do it, but it's actually not going to do any configuration when you apply the config, because you didn't explicitly say that I want to manage these APs. So that can give you as an operator a little bit more comfort of not trusting me because I'm just some guy who wrote this tool. You're like, okay, well, I'll ingest all the AP information. I'll see, do a dry run. I'll see potentially what changes can be made, and then maybe I'll just, dip your toe into it and try one AP or a lab AP, and then you can explicitly define that one for how it gets configured. This is what the inventory file looks like. It's a separate configuration of the main application where you define everything by MAC address. So the 2 dummy MAC addresses there. Switch and gateway is kind of wishful thinking on my part that I was going to be able to help be able to get managed of switches and gateways because the initial deployment of this was using Mist, and so Mist does expose all that through their API. Overly ambitious is an understatement. So there are some artifacts of that there, and that's definitely in a future release to be able to manage devices that are manageable through vendor APIs. So here, when you have those defined, as I showed before, when you do an import, it'll actually say now with a positive confirmation that it did create 4 APs based on whatever the PDF configuration was. Another challenge when you're doing the installations of the APs, when you're giving it to a low voltage contractor, is depending on your model of how you want to deploy things, you either just tell them pick any AP from the box and then just give you the spreadsheet or the list of the MAC addresses so you know which AP went where, or you can explicitly pre-label everything and then give them a very explicit list to say this AP goes to this location. If you do an import where there is no mapping of the MAC address, it's just going to create dummy MAC addresses for you, again, to have speed of deployment and configuration. And basically, it's good from that import. You see the dummy MAC address there, the name, kind of the primitives that are going to be needed to create the object. And from the PDF, it's going to then populate the 3 different bands: transmit power, channel, and bandwidth. And then there's a summary list of the APs and the final configuration. And again, you can see how there's auto there because we didn't make a definition within the PDF. So another thing that can be challenging that I've noticed is getting a comprehensive inventory of your devices. When you're dealing with just a few handful, that's one thing, but when you're at the scale of hundreds or thousands of APs, that can be quite tedious of knowing where things are. Maybe APs move around through RMA process and things like that. So I try to build in as many kind of creature comforts through the CLI to help aggregate, especially if you're multi-vendor, how do you find a MAC address of an AP? And this is just kind of illustrating what that might look like or what it does look like. And it gives you the basic information of the serial number, the model, whether it's an AP or some other type of device, the status of that device. D means it's disconnected, and the site that it's associated with. You see there the cache notation there kind of in the middle of the slide. That's telling you that cache that will be generated, that's how old it is. And so you know that you can, the data might not be fresh enough and you're going to have to refresh manually. The application will automatically do a refresh of the cache just before it does a push of a configuration, though, to make sure that when it does its diffing, that it's using current data. And again, showing a list of devices. So this is illustrating the multi-vendor, how it presents it. So it's showing you that which API that it's actually using. It's showing you that the APs that are managed by the tool are going to be highlighted in green, and then any AP that is not being managed by the tool will not actually have any type of highlight or colorization in there. But it will tell you the status of those devices. So C is connected and D is disconnected. So again, it's this idea that the tool can be used either as an active configuration enforcer, or it can actually just be an aggregator of the current state of the wireless environments and allow you to actually do searches on that through, again, multi-vendor as a single pane of glass. Again, part of this, the safety system, so we declare the keys that are managed by the tool. And so this is more or less the notation. This is all this JSON tree. So, there's the manage keys object, and then you have the device type. AP is really the most supported one, but again, switches and gateways eventually will come through. And you see here, the only key that we really want to manage with AP in this example is just the AP name. And so any other attribute that might be pulled down from the API will be visible, so you'll be able to see the differences. But when you apply the configuration, it's only going to be affecting the name. And so when you do the final application, so you see here, it's doing a diff as you expect, which is, again, one of the limitations of AP infrastructure is that there isn't really an easy way to do a diff because it's through the GUI. Some vendors are starting to adopt that because it's an API. I was impatient, so I tried to figure out a way to do it myself. And so this is showing in red is what's being changed, green is what's being added, and then all the blue are those values that I was mentioning that are coming from the API, but we're not doing anything with them. So it's still giving you the knowledge that we're aware of these values that are being set and they're in the configuration, but we're not touching them. And the leftmost is telling you what is the source of that information. I got a little carried away with the diffing. It ended up being its own, own library that I put on GitHub. But I really like side-by-side diffs. I think in some cases they're a lot easier to read. So this is a way of presenting the diff in a side-by-side format instead of just a linear format. And I incorporated context-aware, so there will be the shading of the color green or red will be bold or not to show you what aspect was actually being changed. And when you actually apply a configuration, I am taking the intent config, the JSON blobs for the site, and basically storing them and it'll giving you the option then to either manually review them, you can copy and paste them, or the tool itself can actually allow you to do a rollback, similar to Junos or other vendors like that. So the roadmap of the tool, Mist is mostly done, and Meraki is feature parity, which is to say that it's also mostly done. A lot of the work that I do with this is really through my access to that particular vendor. I'm fortunate enough to have an old Mist AP, like an AP41 at home, so I was doing a lot of the testing with that. I do run Aruba as my actual home network, but they're just IAPs, so I don't really have access to whatever Aruba is calling their infrastructure now these days. And then Meraki, through Scale, I was able to get a couple APs to create that true multi-vendor support. I do want to eventually, hopefully get access to Cisco. I do have some Ruckus zone directors, but I'm not even sure if that's what they're using anymore. And of course, Ubiquity, because everyone, I think, at some point uses it. So basically, questions for the community, like, is this a valuable tool or not? What are the misses of that I had with this? Am I overlooking anything? Is there any value for it? Like I said, this was a passion project of mine because of the struggles that I was facing with managing just very large AP networks, especially multi-vendor networks. And this definitely scratched that itch, and it allowed me to prevent shooting myself in the foot. And so it'd be interesting to see if any other wireless operators among us find this compelling or not. Love to hear some feedback. And with that, open for any questions about the tool or anything about the process. I know I kind of blew by those slides, but it is late on the Wednesday, so I don't want to make everyone fall asleep.
Naveen do Extreme Networks. Pretty good tool. I'll try to use this myself at my home. I try to run my own network with few access points, so very interesting tool. I did not see anything on network segmentation. So if you could perhaps look into that. Different SSIDs mapping to different VLANs, for example, IoT segmentation with my other home networks. So it's very simple.
So it does, and that's a good point. I should have probably had a couple more reference slides that describe that. But if you can configure it on the platform, so the two platforms with Mist and Meraki, if it's a configurable option, the tool is able to manage those attributes. So there is the notion of like Wi-Fi profiles. So you can define SSIDs, you can define the VLANs that those are associated to, and basically all those attributes. So it is basically, it's like if it's an option, it can be managed by it. And there's a QR for the source. It's on GitHub. And then if you want to find me, there's I promise it's not going anywhere weird. Awesome. Thanks very much.